And welcome everybody to another version of Respect. Hope everybody's well. We have a very special show for you tonight that we had to pre-record due to availability, but I'm sure you're going to find it very, very, very enlightening, very interesting. I hope you all enjoy it. Tonight we're delving into, as many of you have requested, the media and exactly what role the media has played in our lives and why the takedown of mainstream media is so important. So, without further ado, I'd like to bring on our guests for this extra special Respect show, the one and only Lara Logan. And of course, everybody knows Dave. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
How are you all doing tonight?
Good, thanks.
Doing well, Mark.
So, Lara, you've had quite the career. You've had quite the journalistic career, and it's very few people that I can regard as journalists anymore.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me, actually.
You know, we both spent more than our decades in mainstream media, and we've both seen the damage that the mainstream media can do, and continued up until a short time ago to do. Now that's more so white hat journalists, white hat control, so to speak. But you were with a bunch of media organizations. You were the chief foreign correspondent for CBS for a long period of time, 12 years, I think it was. And even during that time, when you would speak your mind, and this became the pattern of mainstream media, you had your share of difficulty with the companies themselves. Um, so we want to address a bunch of those topics tonight
Sure.
and go on about how the mainstream media has become or had become throughout the years a corporate entity, how their interests had nothing to do with presenting the facts to the viewership, but more so presenting their agenda to the viewership. And if you dared to present the facts and go against their agenda, you got reprimanded or fired for it. And how the brainwashing that the mainstream media has put out there over the years is what the white hats are now trying to undo by leaking out in dribs and drabs now, playing their own game against them and letting, as we refer to them, the normies, see what's actually going on out there.
So my experience, Mark, was, I worked at CBS, yes, for 16 years, and I was a full-time correspondent at 60 Minutes, as well as the chief foreign correspondent for the news and division. And I worked at NBC News, ABC News before that. I worked at CNN for years. And I started out as a newspaper reporter. So I wrote for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. I worked for a lot of South African papers, but I my writing was published, in many different publications all over the world. And I also was a fairly prolific radio reporter for a while. So I have experience across all those mediums. I also worked at a news agency, which is on the production side of it, right? Reuters news agency, producing the news that all the networks and other people rely on. So, I really honed my hard news skills in the fires of real journalism. And nobody can take that away from me. They tried really hard. They want to attack you politically and say, oh, you're crazy, you're this, you're that. But I really don't worry about that because I know it's not true. If anything, it's made me better at my job because I'm held to a much higher standard than most of the people you see on television today. I mean, the proof of that is just in the fact that you have people who got Pulitzer Prizes for reporting on Russia collusion, and that's a story that wasn't even real, didn't even happen,
Right.
and it's been exposed, and they got rewarded year after year after year for their false reporting. So it just amuses me when these people they honestly act today like they're in a position to pass judgment on others, which is inexplicable to me. I really don't understand it, because you've lied for years and years and years. You've never been held accountable. You've never held yourself accountable. I couldn't care less what you have to say, right? And my job as a journalist is just to try to report the truth. And I think I'm not sure about your experience. You know, you were probably, because I'm South African, I didn't grow up here. I think you were probably a little more awake than me earlier, because I mean, you 43 years at ABC News. I'm more than 35 years as a journalist, and so I'm a little bit behind you. But I really didn't understand and recognize that there were certain things in our newsrooms, every newsroom I worked in, every network I worked at, every paper I wrote for, that were just kind of assumed to be right and just. Like Roe v. Wade was right and just because my body, my choice, right? Women, I was a feminist, obviously, in a sense, you know, I mean, I'm feminist light, really, compared to the lunatics out there. But I believe that there was nothing a man could do that I couldn't do, and I had a right as a woman to work. But I was also proud to be a mother and a wife. I wanted to fill those roles. And so I've been a major disappointment to every women's organization that's ever brought me in to speak, because I'm the one that says, you know, hey, what, girls, and, you know, you might find that you don't care about your job anymore when you have children. It might not mean anything to you. And honestly, the most important thing I've ever done with my life is not my work. The most important thing I've ever done with my life, the thing that matters more to anyone else, and the, you know, to this, is what I do for my children and what I do for my family. So, and I think you can be both, but what we were lied to about the fact that there's a price. You pay a price for that. You take women and you take mothers away from their children, and you take them out of the home. That leaves a hole. And my husband's not good at filling that hole. My husband is an A-type alpha special operations veteran, right? Okay. He's the guy that you want in the trenches at your side. I mean, there's nobody better. But when it comes to dealing with, you know, teenage girl feelings, okay, forget about it. It ain't happening. This is not happening. So, you know, there is a price that we pay for every choice we make in life. I'm not saying don't have a career if you're a woman, or you can't have both. I have both, but I've paid, you know, a significant price for that in many ways, and I would do it all over again. But I just feel like I was lied to, because they never said there was a price. And it's the same thing. If you look at, there's a pattern to this, right? If you look at globalization, they only told us it was going to make goods cheaper and more accessible, that it would lift up the working man worldwide, that we would have more access to more goods and things that you couldn't afford now, and all of the world would be in a better place. Okay, wait a minute. So when I first went to Iowa, and when I went on family trips with my first husband. I've only had two. I don't want to make it sound like I had a lot, but my first husband, you know, I went all over the Midwest, and I discovered entire towns that had died out, manufacturing towns that were deserted, and where people were struggling and poor. And I'm at 60 Minutes, and I'm thinking, how do I not know about this? Why is this not being covered? How is nobody talking about this? I think my ex-husband's grandfather was the mayor of Lake Okoboji, and you know, we went up there once to sell their old family home, and it was huge, double-story house. I think it sold for less than $10,000. Okay, and there were massive houses next door on either side, many of them with windows boarded up. I mean, we destroyed middle America with globalization. And once again, nobody said there would be a price. And by the way, I travel the world. I don't see people in India any better off, right? For these great jobs that were farmed out all across the world. In fact, you can find poverty. My home, South Africa, is more poor today than it has ever been. It's just absolutely devastating to see that. So globalization, all it's done is concentrate wealth in the hands of a tiny, tiny number of people, an extraordinary amount of wealth. And it's given monopoly power to awful people who claim to be doing, you know, things in the name of, you know, of humanity, and who are really only serving their own interests. And so, and you can see this again and again and again. And when you realize you've been lied to about one thing, like COVID, right? When you get, we all know, we all grew up getting vaccinated, polio vaccine and so on. We know what the vaccination is supposed to do. You take the vaccine, you don't get the illness. Okay, so when you take the vaccine and you get the illness over and over and over again, we know it's a lie. Okay, you don't have to be a scientist, or a doctor or anybody else to know you're being lied to. And that's, really what happened to me is it began with my Benghazi reporting. It honestly began with my Al Qaeda reporting because I didn't realize I put a big target on my back when I started to contradict the false narrative of the Obama administration. They loved me when I told, exposed Cheney for the liar he was. They loved me when I exposed the Bush administration. They put me on, in the New York Times and the Washington Post. I was on the cover of magazines. They loved me then. And so I just continued to do what I'd always done under Obama. And then they didn't love me anymore. That wasn't allowed. No bueno. Okay. No. That's not how this works. We didn't mean it when we said just report the truth. Truth to power. No, we only mean that when it's the people we don't like who are in power. And I was naive enough to think, thank goodness there's a change, right? Thank goodness there's hope. I know. I mean, I'm embarrassed even now thinking about it that I was that naive. If I had been able to vote, because I wasn't a citizen yet, I would have voted for Obama. I thought you couldn't get worse than Bush and Cheney. And honestly, the Obama administration made them look like Mother Teresa on steroids. Okay. These guys were so disgusting and vile and dishonest. I think it's because it's such a sense of betrayal. Cheney never pretended to be transparent and open. They just avoided that subject because they knew they were a bunch of liars doing whatever they wanted. But then you start to dig a little bit deeper and you find out, wait a minute, they said it was supposed to be all these years of Obama followed by Hillary, which is just a continuation of the same policy. And then you go back a little bit and you're like, hold on, who was the first guy talking about the New World Order? Oh, that wasn't Bush Jr.
Bush.
That was Bush Sr. So how far back does this go? How far back does this go? And you know it. I'm sure you've talked about it a lot on your show. Once you start to peel back those layers, let me tell you, as a little girl growing up in South Africa, filled with righteous indignation against racism and apartheid and fighting the good fight, I did not understand the role of the Open Society Foundations in what was happening on South African soil. But many years later, when there was a violent uprising, people trying to take land back, who was the champion of that? None other than the U.S. ambassador at the time. Let me see. A man called Patrice Gaspard. Oh, he's a Haitian. Who appointed him? Obama. And when Obama left office, what was he rewarded with? Well, he became president of the Open Society Foundation. So you start to find that this global ideology, right, that I have seen parts of it all over the world because I've traveled to so many places, I mean, just literally dozens and dozens and dozens, probably 100 countries, maybe more. When you start to put all those little pieces together and you see how they really connect, and that's not allowed. You're not allowed to connect the dots. You're not allowed to tell the truth, and you're supposed to take a knee. And I think my enduring disappointment with my profession, because I worked with a lot of very talented people and I worked with some great people, and I was part of a team. My success, it really was part of an amazing team, and I miss those guys. I miss them so much, right? I really do, still to this day. But my enduring disappointment with my profession as a whole is I didn't know there were so many cowards.
That Laura, that's such a key point because I'm actually here looking forward to listening to both of you as professionals that were in the industry for so long talk about your experiences. And Mark speaks about it very openly on this channel. But one of the things that I personally admire about you that I think sets you aside from so many other people is you just kind of laid out in a little bit of an opening salvo your experience and what you saw and some of the things you were trying to expose. And there are a lot of very good people out there right now inside and outside of mainstream media, mainly outside, that are trying to expose the system and the people that have done these things. But where you take it a step further, and the reason I tend to put you, kind of elevate you above many other people that have stepped outside of the mainstream media, is not only are you trying to expose the system, as you said, things like the New World Order and the vaccine agenda and all these other narratives that we have out there, but you are one of the few people that is not only trying to expose the system that we're fighting, but you're also really working hard to expose the system that covers it up. And
Yeah.
that might seem like not a lot to most people, but without naming names, there's a lot of people that have stepped out of the mainstream media and started platforms, and they're doing their part to expose things. But you've taken a step further by being very open about your experience and not only these problems we have in our society and the control mechanism, but what I think is more important, which is the people and the systems that are covering it up, that have prevented us from even knowing about the things that you're talking about. And that to me is so prolific, because I think that it's very easy to go out there and say, here are the problems. Here's what they're doing to us in the pharmaceutical industry. Here's what they're doing in geopolitics. Here's what they're doing in local politics. But you take it a step further by saying, look, this is what happened. I'm showing you now under the hood. These are the problems, but these are also the reasons why your local trusted news source aren't telling you about it. And that's
Well,
such an
there's
important thing.
Dave, there's that old saying, right, that the cover up is worse than the crime.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in a sense what you're talking about. Well, I've always been driven by, I have a profound belief in the goodness of man. And I've seen that so many times in my life that no one can shake that belief, right? And I've always wanted to understand, because I knew that I had no value to anyone. I was of no use if I did not. It begins with understanding. So you have to understand the things you agree with as well as the things that you don't, the things that you are fascinated by, and as well as the things that, like, do you think when I covered biological warfare that and nuclear warfare, that I really was interested in nuclear fusion and all these other things? No, I had to force myself to pay attention to those things and be interested, because if I didn't understand it, then I had no value. So I had nothing to offer. So how could I share anything at all, right? And so that was always my guiding light and my guiding force. Plus, I was born with an innate sense of horror at injustice. It's the thing that broke my heart. My mother used to say, "Oh, the problem with you, my girl, is your bladder is right behind your bloody eyeballs." Because it would break my heart. I would weep, and it's still there. I still have that same heart. I'm still that same person, but in when I was so savagely attacked within my own profession and externally, it opened my eyes. And I've been in this fight for more than a decade, right? I have people tell me I'm tired, and I look at them and I want to laugh sometimes, because I'm like, you're tired. Jeez, how long I've been attacked for. Okay, I'm exhausted, but I'm never going to give up, because I really I do see that it's a very different environment today. When people are being attacked today, millions of people recognize it now for what it is. And honestly, most of the people responsible for this are still getting away with it. I mean, if anyone looks at a post that I just did on X, they'll see where I'm talking about Act Blue and trying to get people to understand Act Blue is now the big topic of the day. But I've been covering Act Blue since 2016, trying to get people to realize they instituted an entire system of money laundering and control that is, one from the top down. We know about the big donors and the super PACs and the Open Society Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Tides Foundation, the BLM Foundation, and all these affinity groups. Is how they launder all this money. But how do they get it from the bottom up? Well, they do it with Act Blue. Who's behind Act Blue? Who's the brainchild? David Brock of Media Matters. What is Media Matters for America? You'll find Media Matters behind almost every person who's been targeted and canceled in this country in the last, 20 years. And not only that, but where else will you find David Brock? Well, you'll find him in Facts First USA, whose stated job, right, is to keep shows like this, or what they regard as conservative media or right-wing media and so on, independent media, you name it, to keep it within a silo. So that they've realized they can't stop you existing. So what they do is they build a wall around you because they have information dominance, because they've taken over, right? The CBSs and the NBCs, the ABCs, these giants in the media were born in a different time where there wasn't the technology today. You didn't have the plethora of people doing podcasts and so on and so on. So you'll never build those today. You can't create something new like that. So what did they do? They took it all over. They infiltrated, they took it over, they made it their own, and they dominate the information space. And so because they can't prevent other people, they can't stop people like me from speaking out and existing, what they try to do is create a silo around all of us so that no one ever hears about us. You can read that on Facts First USA's website. It's in their mission statement. Oh yeah, and by the way, who's running Facts First USA? Yeah, that's right, David Brock of Media Matters for America fame. And also, haven't you noticed what's happened, that this is happening in the legal space as well? That you can't, that lawyers are being targeted and disbarred if they dare to take a case about election fraud, or if they represent something related to Trump or the, Make America Great Again movement, and so on and so on. Well, that's not an accident. That is the brainchild again of David Brock and others who created the 65 Project, which is run by Michael Tita, an attorney out of Utah, and who is one of the main people behind all of this kind of lawfare and propaganda is a man called Norm Eisen. And if you go back, Norm Eisen, look up Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, CREW, right? CREW used to try to be, or at least in name, it was a bipartisan or nonpartisan organization. Please, who are the people that launched that first lawsuit against Donald Trump when he, on his immigration policy? Who was that? That was CREW, all right? And David Brock took over CREW, and who was one of the co-founders of CREW? Norm Eisen, right? And if you look out there at who are the people attacking the judges for every decision when it comes to Trump's legal cases or attacking Trump's attorneys, well, yeah, you'll see Norm Eisen. And then you peel back more layers, you can find Midas Touch, you can find the Lincoln Project, you can find all of these people. I don't understand why these people are a real cancer in our society. And I first discovered them when they came after me for my Benghazi reporting. I had no idea these people existed. They have budgets worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. All they do all day long is figure out ways to destroy people like you and me. When they get up, the people that work for them, when they get up in the morning, they go to work and take pleasure out of ruining people's lives. I borrowed a phrase from a friend of mine in counter trafficking who rescues children. And he said to me once that sex trafficking is how you murder a child without killing them. And I realized that's what they do to people like me and to you and to doctors who say that natural immunity is more effective than a vaccine that isn't actually a vaccine, right? Or who said that ivermectin worked, and so on. This is what they did to the doctors. It's what they do to scientists who want to expose the fact that the Earth's been warming and cooling every 200 years from the time it existed. And geologists have measured this, in micro measurements going back millennia. And temperature records have only been kept for just over 100 years. And the first 50 years pretty much were sailors sticking a drunken finger over the side, testing the water and guessing what the temperature might be. I mean, it's a joke, right? It's an absolute joke. And honestly, the thing that shocks me more than anything else is that now that I start to investigate these things, I realize that that newsroom at 60 Minutes or at CBS or NBC, it's like being in a living with the Walking Dead. You have to be brain dead not to have figured this out at this point. I mean, when you've got whistleblowers bringing evidence before the Senate, for a Senate committee, who are talking about hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors that are unaccounted for right now by the United States government, when they have evidence of trafficking with taxpayer money by the administration, and these journalists from places like New York Times are doing stories attacking people like myself or General Flynn, who I'm on the board of his foundation, America's Future, they're attacking people like us instead of actually trying to figure out. They can go and speak to Secretary Shauna Harris. I believe that's her name, in charge of children and families in the state of Florida. This is an African American woman who testified. She said that of all the kids that are coming into the state of Florida that they've investigated, less than 10% of these unaccompanied minors are being reunited with their families, going to their parents. Less than 10%. What do you think is happening to the other 90-something%? Why don't you care? You cared so much about kids in cages. It was every day. It was a constant drumbeat. It was over and over and over again. The evil Trump, the evil Trump, the evil Trump, these poor families. But now you literally have the ability to go door to door to those addresses. You will find what the Muckraker guys found, right? Their film's coming out. They've been putting out little bits of information. I've spoken to them. They've got girls who are begging them for help. They've got girls who say, I'm being forced to have sex against my will with men I don't know. I don't know my sponsor. I'm begging you, please help me. I just want to go home. You've got, for goodness sake, the leader of Guatemala. 70% or more of these unaccompanied minors are coming from Guatemala. You've got the leader of Guatemala saying, what are you doing with our children? Their parents want them back. And you call yourself a journalist, and you don't think that it's incumbent upon you to do a little bit of digging and try to find the truth and have a backbone and report the truth. You know what? I'm sorry, but you are absolutely worthless. I don't care how many cute, fancy little stories you do about truffles in the south of France or whatever else you're doing on Sunday morning, some quirky little piece about diners in Middle America. Please, are you kidding me? We've got hundreds of thousands of kids that are unaccounted for. You want to call yourself a serious journalist and pass judgment on other people. I have no time for you.
I've told the story about 9/11 several times. Now, admittedly so. Emotional day. We lost a friend in the building. Our transmitter guy was on the 110th story, the North Tower. When word started to come out about the buildings having been taken down. Now, throughout my career, I covered numerous building implosions, especially when they were going to retrofit Newark, New Jersey, and take down a lot of the projects.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the implosion, and one of the first things that you noticed there was, they had the countdown, the whistle went off, and they'd implode the building. You saw the manner in which it was imploded. You saw the manner in which the building came down. But the key point was always the way the dust hit the ground, and then the plume that ensued from there, how it rose and enveloped the entire area. So it was pretty obvious that those two towers and Building 7 were imploded. As time went on and more stuff came out, I actually gathered up a whole bunch of stuff and sent it to one of our reporters. I was already retired at that point. Sent it to one of our reporters and said, look, you were pretty dead center in this whole thing. I think you ought to take a look at this and you might want to revisit it. Not a return phone call, not a view, not an investigation. Our business let the American public down, let the worldwide public down, because it's not just in this country, it's global. But in this country, they let the public down, feeding them. We had a phrase about the company in regard to us that, they treated us like mushrooms. They feed us bullshit and keep us in the dark. And that's what we did to the American public. We would feed them what we wanted them to hear. And when you repeat it over and over and over again, you're brainwashing them. And they believe it because, after all, the guy on camera is not going to lie to you. He's on TV. He can't possibly be lying to you. And one of the things that I wondered, because you brought it up, I know with the Benghazi situation,
Yeah.
I had my own feelings about what had happened, because I know, you meet with a source. The source has information. and in your case had pictures and all kinds of data and this and that and the other, and you did your report, and you got dragged on the carpet for it and had to issue a retraction, a public retraction.
Yeah.
I don't think that your report was false. I think your report was probably dead on, but a combination of your source probably got his butt dragged on the carpet,
Yeah,
had to
probably.
do a CYA,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thus in turn, CBS made you retract and then punish you for it afterwards.
Okay, so let me start with the 9/11 part, right? Because that's a very interesting example that you raised. Now, I have not seen a building implode before, and I was a young reporter living in the UK, watched those buildings, watched that plane go into the buildings, couldn't believe my eyes, but I had been covering Osama bin Laden for some time. So I knew, I mean, to me, if it's a terrorist attack, I knew instantly that it was going to be, Al Qaeda, bin Laden. Um, and then I spent the next 15 years on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. I lived 5 years in Baghdad. And witnessed, um, I witnessed many soldiers get blown up, shot, wounded, killed. I've been to memorial services and so on, right? And I've been blown up, and I've been in the kill zone, and I've been shot at many times. And I've also seen what was done to I've also seen what was done to the people in Iraq and Afghanistan on, the price that was paid there, right? Because contrary to what's out there, I never lived in the green zone. I always lived with the people, and I didn't spend all my time with the American forces. In fact, I spent most time living with the Afghan people and living with the Iraqi people. So, so for me, it's really it's interesting because I I struggle. I have never tackled the building thing. When you go into those things, it requires exhaustive reporting, right? And the reality is, I just don't have the resources to do that, because when you're in the independent media world, that's one of the things they do, is strip you of your ability to function at the level that you were functioning at, and that's by design. But then also what you find is that it's in every direction you turn, right? I mean, if you're really going to get to the bottom of COVID and Ralph Barrick and, and everything that was happening at Chapel Hill University in South Carolina, and the NIH and the NIAD and the funding of COVID, and you could go even further back than that to Fauci and HIV and what he was doing with remdesivir being the same as what he was doing with AZT, right? How they were mimicking, they created a drug they presented as the solution that was mimicking the progression of the disease. So all these people were dying of AZT, thinking that it was saving them or helping them, and they were not dying of HIV. And, Fauci was heavily involved in that. So again, election integrity, 2.5 years I spent investigating election integrity. And there's a lot I can tell you about that, but there's still so much that is inaccessible, right? And 90% of the time when I'm investigating something, it's on my own time. I'm not paid for it. And I just have to find a way to somehow make it work. So 9/11 is one I haven't chosen to tackle yet, in part because I feel like if I'm going to go out there publicly with the weight of more than 35 years of journalism behind me, and the gravitas and the integrity that I think people have become to expect from me, I'm not going to be cavalier with the lives of people I saw die, right? And so that's part of it. That can sound like an excuse. It's kind of like a vaccinated person or a parent who vaccinated their kids that doesn't want to face the fact that, they might have put their child in danger rather than protecting them. So I take a little bit of a mea culpa there. But then also at the same time, one of the things I've come to understand is that when we talk about globalists, the global cult is global. It's fully global. So it has an Islamic faction as much as it has people in, the royal family and in the UK and all over Europe and so on and so on and so on. When they say global, they do mean global. And what's so interesting about that, my eyes were first opened to that by a man who was tasked by the United States government, an intel person, who spent many years underground training to infiltrate the global cult. And his faction was the Middle East faction. So I learned a lot about this global cult and how enmeshed it is, in fact, with Islam as much as Satanism. And I'm not saying that Islam is Satanism. I'm just saying that we of the 9/11 generation, right, saw the rise of this Islamic terror threat. But what I didn't see at the time was that Islamic terrorism and jihad is as effective in controlling millions and millions, if not billions, of Muslims as, Marxism is in controlling millions of people in communist countries and all over the world, right? Which is the same as like Antifa and the left. All of these divides, these labels are control mechanisms. And when you look back, they hate it when I say this, right? I get attacked for saying this every time, but you can't change the truth. Karl Marx was hired by the Rockefellers, no, the Rothschilds, excuse me, I misspoke. Karl Marx was hired by the Rothschilds to create and design a system of social control. So socialism and the origins of Marxism, these are systems of social control. So why would Islam be any different? You've got people lining up to offering their children to go and kill themselves. Well, that just serves the cause, right? And then when I start to put these pieces together, because if you go back to the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, from 1980 to 88, when Saddam Hussein was at war with Iran, more than 1 million Iranians died in that war. But the mullahs never had any problem staying in power because people believed that they went with God. And so this is a very powerful tool of social control when you're fighting a holy war, right? Saddam Hussein didn't start carrying a Quran with him until after he lost that. Well, I don't remember if he lost that war. It was more kind of, he survived that war, right? But it was only after this is right. It was after he lost in Kuwait. It's after he was beaten in Kuwait. Then he started to start carrying the Quran around with him. So that was very interesting to me because then I started to look at Islamic terrorism in a different way. And I started to look historically, where can you find parallels? Well, you can find them with the Nazis. Because just look at where Hitler went prior to the Second World War. He went across the Middle East and into Islamic countries, making deals with the right kind of Islamists, right? So, i.e., the Islamists that are part of this global cult that are not really serving their people any more than many of the people in power today in this country are serving the people, right? Or even many of those who are not in power yet, hoping to get back into power, who despise the people as much as their colleagues across the aisle. So I thought I wanted to say that I do think there is merit in having a proper and close examination and investigation of what really happened with those buildings on 9/11. I have not done that yet, so I would not disrespect all of the people who sacrificed so much by making cavalier or careless statements, or reckless statements about that. But I would also say to you that I admire your optimism in sending that to your colleague at ABC, your former colleague, because you didn't stand a snowball's chance in hell, okay? There was no way they were going to touch that. If there's no moral courage that comes into that. It's all about self-interest. So that's on the 9/11 side. On the Benghazi side, what I would say to you is that you probably don't know is that I was working on Benghazi for more than 6 months before I was ever contacted by the source that you're referring to. And I was never actually contacted directly by him. That came through 60 Minutes. That came through the person who was in charge of books. Because one of the advantages that 60 Minutes has is it used to be the place that you really wanted to be to sell your book. And so, Neil Armstrong, when he finally came out and did a book, he was always going to do it on 60 Minutes, right? And so, they had an office, a division of 60 Minutes that was dedicated basically to those kinds of stories. Now, I was low in the pecking order because I was a young correspondent. They didn't care one bit about currying favor with me. It was all about Mike Wallace and Ed Bradley and, and so on, and rightly so, right? I didn't bother me. I mean, my team, the guys that I worked with, typically amazing people, we would focus on generating our own unique content and stories. So most of the stories I did from the battlefield, in fact, pretty much all of them on 60 Minutes, came from my own original reporting and contacts and relationships and depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge, right? You live 5 years on a battlefield. Believe me, there's no correspondent who's parachuting in that's going to outclass you. That's not going to happen. Okay. And especially when they're doing the dog and pony show 90% of the time, right? Which is just the kind of reporter they like because it's skin deep and they can get away with saying whatever they want to, and nobody's any the wiser. So, but with us, I got a tip. I got a message delivered to me, not a tip, a message delivered to me by a very senior person in the special operations world who had that message personally given to him at Fort Bragg. And I'm not going to elaborate more than that, by someone who was part of a very specific elite place. And they said, you got to look at these two guys that saved the people in the annex. That, I mean, like, they make what happened with the Bin Laden raid look like child's play, right? Because nobody knew that there were two guys that had gone from Tripoli down to Benghazi, that they were never sent, they were never ordered, they were never told to go, they were nothing. These guys, the moment they saw what was happening, heard what was happening, they went around the embassy, they collected money from people, and they hired a plane, and they flew down there on their own. And they linked up with a local militia that they work with, because that's the kind of unit they were, right? The unit, that's the kind of training they had, people they were. And with those guys, they fought their way into the annex. And they rescued those guys at the annex and then fought their way back. They also got that local militia to go to the hospital and pick up Chris Stevens' body. And so this was an unbelievable tale that nobody in America knew about. Those two individuals should have received the Medal of Honor. We know why they didn't, because the Obama administration, you give a Medal of Honor, it's a big deal. Every news outlet in America is reporting on it, and they did not want the scrutiny on that. They try to just keep it under the table. One of them had the Distinguished Service Cross, and one of them had the Navy Cross. So I believe those are the two medals that are right under the Medal of Honor. And you'd say, well, they were both working for the Army. They were green, okay? And you might say, well, how come? Well, the one had entered his service through the Navy, and he had never changed his branch of service. That's why his medal was different. Well, I tried for many, many months to get the people in power to let me tell that story. That was the purpose of my Benghazi reporting. That was the story that I set out to tell. And I got blocked at every turn. Blocked by the Pentagon, blocked by JSOC, blocked by SOCOM, blocked by the Office of the SecDef. If you can think of a person related that's in power, I got blocked. I had people that I had known for years that literally would go to a neighbor's house on a weekend to call me and say, don't ever email me or call me about this subject again, because it's the end of my career. So I went through months of this, okay, months. And when word kind of got out within CBS, like, because David Rhodes, his brother Ben Rhodes, was one of the architects of the entire BS, false Benghazi narrative about this being about a movie, a protest about a movie, and not being about what it was really about, which was Al-Qaeda, right? And when David Rhodes found that out, he would sort of always come over and say, oh, how's your Benghazi story going? And I got the weirdest email from him when it aired. All it said was one line I've burned into my memory. I'm sure your sources are happy. And I think that they were so annoyed because I had gone to General Petraeus, I'd gone to General Flynn, who was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I knew my reporting was solid. But in the middle of this process, people kept sending books to the CBS office that does books. And I was told by my bosses, check out this book, see if there's anything in it. And eventually we got this one book that was from a British contractor, and he was hired through a British security firm. He was the guy on the ground that was doing the perimeter security at the Special Mission Compound in Benghazi. Now, let me tell you, this is the guy that they said lied. This is the guy that disappeared. This is the guy whose story I could not defend once he disappeared. He said he got death threats and that was it. He was out. He wasn't defending himself anymore. This is the guy who they created an after action report from that night that contradicted what he told us. And he said to us, I've never seen that report in my life. I never wrote it. I have no idea who did write it. There's nothing in it that's true, and it's got nothing to do with me. I went to the Chris Stevens, his deputy, who became acting ambassador, the last person to speak to Chris Stevens alive. I showed him this report that was, by the way, the big scoop in the Washington Post and other media outlets, right? That they proved that my reporting was false because here they got this document leaked to them anonymously. And also, by the way, if it was a legitimate document, it would have been a classified document because that was under investigation. But nobody worries about those journalistic details when you're busy accusing someone of not doing any journalism. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good takedown, right?
Bingo.
Yeah. And the deputy ambassador said to me, that has a stamp on it. That report has a stamp on it. It says U.S. Embassy, Benghazi. He said, it's not an embassy. It's a special mission compound. And I have never seen that stamp. And I have never seen that report. And as the deputy ambassador who became the acting ambassador, I saw every piece of paper, every single one. That is 100% false. But you know what? Nobody wanted to hear it because what did you have? You had a system, a full court press, where John Kerry was at the State Department. His press person was calling another 60 Minutes correspondent saying, hey, your reporting is wrong. Don't, I just want to help you guys out and do you a solid. Don't want you to embarrass yourselves, right? And this starts happening all over. Your FBI people, like in CBS, you have your people whose beat is the FBI and law enforcement. So they're getting calls from their FBI people saying, oh, I knew that guy was lying. Never mind that we took the State Department's ARB off their own reporting on the incident, and we matched everything this guy told us, every single thing he told us. We matched it with their report. I mean, we got copies of his military record. We got photocopies in his passport of his stamps that showed that he was in Benghazi when he said he was. When he said that on the north wall, on this tower, the light went out in April, it was fixed 2.5 months later on this day. We matched all of those details. We did a level of reporting that nobody in the media that criticized our reporting has ever dreamt of doing, okay? Still don't do to this day. But the one thing that we did not do, which they excoriated us on, was violate the NDA. We signed a non-disclosure agreement that was written by CBS's attorney, and it was with the publisher, and it said, you can not disclose any part of this man's story of what he did that night in Benghazi prior to your story going to air, other than to talk to your bosses at CBS to get the story approved. And we took that NDA seriously. There's no mention of that NDA in the report that CBS put out. Okay, when their internal review that criticized my colleagues and I, they never mentioned that NDA, which tells you everything, because they know that NDA vindicated us completely. We were mocked internally. Oh, that doesn't mean anything. Wait, what do you mean an NDA doesn't mean anything? What are you talking about? Like, I mean, I'm not a person. I don't get into trouble. I mean, I do some crazy things sometimes, like traveling in the, following illegal immigrants around Calais and France and going into the front line of war and that kind of thing, but never reckless and never with a disregard, never with a reckless disregard, honestly. And integrity is everything to myself and to my amazing producer, Max McClellan. He was exactly the same. Max and I made it through that entire Benghazi investigation, and we were tortured for the next few years until they eventually fired him, and then my contract wasn't renewed. And we never had a single fight or disagreement over Benghazi, because even when they took us into separate rooms and questioned us over and over and over again, we never had to worry, because we knew the truth, and we knew that we would both tell the truth, and we knew it would never contradict each other, because there's only one truth. So what happened is once basically this guy became one of three characters in our story. But they removed our story from the internet, which allowed all these reporters and propagandists and political operatives led by Media Matters for America and David Brock. It allowed them to say whatever they wanted. It allowed them to say that our entire story was false. I'll never forget this woman, Nancy Youssef, a reporter for McClatchy, which I think thankfully has gone bankrupt, right, and no longer exists. Nancy Youssef used to, be my buddy, and when we both were reporting from Baghdad. This woman went and wrote. I mean, her entire article was fabricated. She wrote because we dispensed with the false line that they put between Ansar al-Sunnah in Libya, the organization that they said that was behind the attack, and Al-Qaeda. Because when you peel back the layers, what you realize is that Al-Qaeda, under international sanctions, they created all these franchises in all these countries because they could operate free of sanction, but they were all part of Al-Qaeda. Of course, the Treasury Department, not that long after our story was disgraced by the media, designated all the Ansar al-Sunnah organizations in Libya and Turkey and so on as Al-Qaeda organizations. So they proved us right. I don't remember how long it was after our reporting. Also, the man that we said, because they had a fake mastermind that was outed by the New York Times as being the real guy that was responsible. We knew he was nobody. He was the low-hanging fruit that they had offered up as the guy responsible so that nobody would dig for the real guy. And so we also dealt with that in our piece. We were the first ones to report the guy who was really Bin Kumu was his name, the guy who was really behind it. Well, of course, 2 years later, what did they do? The State Department and the Treasury Department fingered him as the man behind the Benghazi attack. So, I mean, everything we reported, we were the first people to report that there were 2 Delta guys that had saved the guys at the annex and had been recognized for what they'd done. All of that was just flushed under the rug, right? Because they wanted to take that story down so badly. And the reason they wanted to discredit it so badly is because that contractor that they went after, that British guy, he had gone to the scene the following day and took all those photographs that you mentioned, right? Those photographs were the only evidence the FBI had for weeks, because if you remember, they weren't able to get to the scene for many weeks afterwards. And we saw emails between him and several FBI agents, and between people from the CIA and State Department and so on, talking about meeting with him, and also talking about going back and meeting with him, showing him photographs of suspects from the scene. So we knew they were lying when they came out and said that he was a liar, because if he was a liar, why were they using him to identify eyewitnesses, right? But there was a hole, because he had told us that his boss had asked him to stay in his compound and not go to try and help his buddies who are under attack. And so he lied to his boss when he went back. So no matter which version of the story we went with, they were going to say he was a liar. Of course, when I said this afterwards, he lied to his boss. People were like, well, you knew he was a liar and you put him on TV. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? How many times did you stop to buy a Starbucks and tell your boss you were caught in traffic? You know what I mean? It's like, it'll be ridiculous. And probably the most important person, we had 2 other people in that story, and they did not want you to know what those 2 people said. The one was in charge of security in Tripoli, and he told us how he had sent cables to, the CIA station chief in Washington, the State Department, everybody. He had told everyone, we're going to be attacked in Benghazi. They said they were going to attack the British ambassador, and they did. They said they would attack the Red Cross, and they did. We are the only international organization left in that city. If we stay there, we will be attacked and Americans will die. So they didn't want anyone to know that. And he had all the receipts. He had all the proof. He testified before Congress. Amazing man, actually. And then, of course, it was Greg Hicks, the deputy ambassador. And this is the part, I think, that sent the Hillary campaign through the roof. And I underestimated the politics of this. Because I really was not a political reporter. And what he said is, I asked him to tell me about how this whole thing unfolded. He told me about that call from Chris Stevens, Chris saying to him, we're under attack, it's terrorists, I think he knew he was going to die. And Greg Hicks has to then take up the mantle, take up command. And he says to me, I looked at the attaché, the defense attaché. And for those of you who don't know, the defense attaché is usually the top spy in any embassy, right? So he says, I looked at the defense attaché and I said to him, and he says, he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry, Greg, but the cavalry ain't coming. He says, and this was about 10 minutes into the attack. Okay, think back to all of that reporting about which assets were where and who did what and why they couldn't, blah, blah, blah. 10 minutes in, the defense attaché said, the cavalry ain't coming. Definitive statement. And Greg Hicks looks at me on, that 60 minutes framing is so powerful. And he says, and that decision never changed. And I knew when I heard it, I felt sick in the pit of my stomach. He said, because those of us who go out on the end of the line for our country, we believe our country has our back. And in that moment, I knew it didn't. And I looked at him and I said, we better tell the boys at the annex. And what do we know? We now know, we knew then that 2 of those boys at the annex died. And if it were not for those 2 Delta guys that went down there on their own steam, unsolicited, right, who made that happen on their own, they may all have died. Certainly what they were trying to do was take them hostage. And I was told, by people who were involved that it would have been the worst hostage crisis in the history of the United States, especially since the Iranian hostage crisis, that would never have seen anything like it. So, my motivation for doing that story was not political. It didn't have anything to do with Hillary Clinton. And what I saw happen was once they did the full court press and they went to every media organization and they used the FBI, they used the State Department, they used the White House, they used every office, they used Media Matters, they used them all and they pressured everyone. Then I began to understand what this monster looked like, right? And then the New York Times did a piece congratulating David Brock on taking me out. And sadly, 60 Minutes hasn't done any worthwhile, groundbreaking reporting since that day. They took a knee, they surrendered, it terrorized them sufficiently because nobody wanted to be Lara Logan. Nobody wanted to be. I went from being the future of that show, the face of the greatest investigative news program ever, to being a pariah. And I think they were hoping that I was just going to crawl into a hole and die and go away. And they've run out. The only thing that they can say about me that they say over and over and over again, it's just so, it's pathetic, is she used to be a great reporter, but she isn't anymore. Okay, so we all know that doesn't work. Oh, she's gone crazy now, and this kind of thing. But I think those attacks are based on, number one, fear, because they fear the truth. They don't fear me. They fear the truth. And number two, every time they come after you, they give something away. They give something up. You see sometimes you see these anons that have been sort of real fixtures in the so-called conservative world. And I see them attacking me and I'm like, oh, okay, I got you now. And I keep a list because this is the season of reveal where we start to see people for who they really are. And I am not, I went out, one thing I want to address, I went out on television and I apologized. And I did what CBS and 60 Minutes wanted me to do. I volunteered to do it, even though the New York Times reported I had to be forced. That was a lie, one of the many lies they told. And I did it because in that moment, it wasn't about me. I lacked the resources. I knew the FBI was going to lie because this guy said I told the FBI everything. And it was then all hinging on what he told the FBI. And at that time, when I said to my boss, I just hope the FBI doesn't lie. And he was mad at me, and he said, are you crazy? Like, are you honestly suggesting that the FBI would lie about something like that? Well, look where we are today. How many people actually believe anything the FBI says, right? But in those days, we didn't know any better. We actually thought that, maybe a white lie here and there, but by and large, they're going to tell you the truth. And now we know that was very naive.
Well, that's been my timeline. Go ahead, Dave.
I just wanted to follow up real quick, Mark, before you go to your next question. I just wanted to point something out because you said a few things there that I made some notes here. Um, you talked about the word integrity with your team, and I think what you just demonstrated with that entire answer you gave um, completely demonstrates the type of integrity that you have as a reporter for the truth. And I would make the argument that what the mainstream media says about you used to being a good reporter, it's quite the opposite. I think what you're doing now, when history is written, you're going to be identified as somebody that's been one of the best reporters at this point in history. And the reason I say that is that initial answer when we were talking about 9/11, and you basically came out and said, there's some credence there, but I personally haven't looked into it. And therefore, I'm not going to opine on that position, but let's talk about the downstream effects of what happened. And you went into Iraq and Afghanistan and what they did to those people over there, which happened regardless of who caused 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what is sorely lacking in the media nowadays, is exactly what you just did, which is they want us to gatekeep over things. Who caused Benghazi? Who caused 9/11? Who caused COVID? Not that they're not important issues.
Yeah.
But in the interim, while we're trying to figure out where the virus came from, let's not forget to talk about the downstream effects of what it caused, right? Yes. While we're trying to decide what happened with 9/11, that's an important conversation. But let's not lose sight over what the downstream effects of that was on the war, on the economy, on our reputation around the world. And what you just laid out there with all these different things just shows what, in my opinion, makes you who you are and what needs to be done more, which is, listen, they want us to fight about COVID and the vaccine. And I am one of the ones that will die on that hill. It's important. But in the interim, while you and I or me and Mark or somebody else might disagree on the genesis of the pandemic, let's not lose sight of the downstream effects, the depression, the anxiety, the suicides, the closed businesses, and the same thing with 9/11. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to point that out because I think what you just demonstrated there is exactly what makes you who you are, and so important to getting the truth out there is you do what mainstream media doesn't. They want to gatekeep you right at 9/11. Nope, you question 9/11, that's it. You question Benghazi, that's it. In other words, let's die on the hill of who did it. And while we're dying on the hill of who did it, let's not look at all the other effects and all the other important things. They want to gatekeep us at these little topics. Who caused it? Who caused COVID? Who caused the vaccine? They're all important. But in the meantime, a real journalist is going to say, we might be able to disagree about the cause, but while we're fighting about that, let's look at the downstream effects. And that is so important. So I just wanted to really compliment you on that because, again, that just shows you why you've been, like anybody else, cast out into this whole, clown show situation that we're living through right now, where the truth is demonized and censored and beaten up. But it's super important to do what you just did, which is if we had people on the television every night that admitted where they don't have all the answers, but still wanted to have a discourse and a conversation about what's going on beyond that, we'd be in a lot better place as a society. So I just really wanted to compliment you on that and point it out. And that's what, that's why they attack you so much, because you're doing it the right way. You're doing what everyone on the television should be doing.
Well, it's one of the things, I think one of the most valuable lessons I learned is to be conscious of what you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we as journalists are so busy trying to figure everything out and show what we know that sometimes we don't allow for what we don't know. And people ask all the time, because this is very difficult now. We have so much information and it's hard to discern what's true and what's not true. And I've noticed, there's a very robust, very effective tactic that they use when something happens. They will often insert a dramatic photograph or a piece of information or, a theory that directs people in a certain way. And then once it's been shared a lot, then they'll discredit it. And so everybody, you just see this collective, people withdraw, right? So they manage to dilute the truth, right? Because you can't see the truth anymore. There's all this other stuff flooding the information space. and then they discredit it, and they get people to withdraw, and so now people stop asking questions. They did that in the Texas when they had the winter freeze, and they were all the big, and what that really exposed was that all the sustainable climate nonsense is just nonsense, right? And that the wind power couldn't be stored and solar power couldn't be stored, and then they said, oh well, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still support it. It's like, wait a minute, the wind didn't blow for weeks before that storm hit. Okay, they used up all the spare resources of gas because Texas politicians have been taking kickbacks from the green movement, and they've not been investing, in our gas infrastructure. And so when we really needed it, we were screwed. So how do they stop that conversation? Well, they leaked a photograph of a helicopter winterizing a wind turbine. And they said that was Texas, and they started this big fight over, well, Texas has this problem because they didn't winterize their turbines. Of course, they didn't winterize their turbines because they hadn't had snow storm like that in, I don't know, half a century or more. So you don't need to winterize your turbines. But what happened? The photo turned out to be fake. I mean, not fake, it came from somewhere else. It wasn't Texas, and it was old, and it was this. So then nobody talked about the climate anymore. End of discussion. That whole thing exposing the green movement for what it really was, and it was just dead, right? Same thing with Afghanistan. They leaked. They had a picture of a little boy screaming, and his father had a rope around his neck, and there's a Taliban soldier standing there. And this is at a time when the terrible murders and atrocities in Afghanistan as a result of what the Biden administration did there, handing that country to our terrorist enemies. That was at a time where that was hurting them, right? They didn't want those pictures of suffering out. So you see this picture, and of course it gets shared everywhere. And then they say, oh, this little boy's dad committed suicide and put the rope around his own neck, and this Taliban guy was helping him. Now, how do you know what's true and what's not true? You don't know. So what does everybody do? Oh, boom, that's it. Nobody wants to talk about people suffering in Afghanistan anymore, because you know what? Nobody really wants to be wrong. So there's all these tactics that they use, to try to dilute the truth. There's ambiguity increasing, where they flood the information space with a whole bunch of stuff because they don't want you to know what's true. And then there's ambiguity decreasing, right, where you start to see things for who, and people for who they really are. And for me, the Palestinian, the whole October 7th Hamas, that whole movement is ambiguity decreasing, because I've been shouting from the rooftops that the greatest existential threat to the state of Israel comes from the left for 15 years now, and now people can finally see it. Maybe when you saw that video of the American flag coming down and the Palestinian flag being raised, maybe you finally get it. Maybe not. My sincere wish for all of those people is that they get dropped off in Gaza with no way out, because I think they'll find out a very different reality when they're up close with Hamas, not with the Palestinian people, but with Hamas. But I'm saying all of that because one of the other tactics that I learned was just to be conscious of what I don't know. So when people ask me certain things, what about this or what about that? I say, well, on the surface, superficially, it looks this way, but I don't know enough. Or more importantly, when you hear somebody making statements on television, ask yourself if that information is actually knowable. So Benghazi is a great example, because they said, generals and all these people said it wouldn't have made any difference if we'd flown drones or we'd dropped a bomb or we'd flown jets overhead. Wouldn't have made any difference. Okay, how do you know? Because you didn't do it. You cannot say definitively that it would not have made a difference, because that is unknowable. So the unknowable is really, really an important tool for people to realize. When people go on TV and say, Donald Trump did not expect to win the election, he had no intention of seeing this through to the end. How do you know that? You cannot possibly know that. You are not Donald Trump. And I tell you, once you start to apply that standard, you can write off about 80% of what you hear on television.
Yep. Absolutely.
You see on social media, because you got all these people out there speaking definitively about things they cannot know about. They're just not in a position. They're either unknowable completely, or they're unknowable for that person, or they're unknowable in the moment. So, best example, the Trump assassination attempt. I can tell you 100% that there's no such thing as a lone wolf, because it takes a team to create a lone wolf. Can I tell you who the team was that groomed and prepared that guy? No, I can't tell you
No.
that. Can I say to you definitively, 100%, this was this? I can't tell you that. I can just tell you that I know that there is no such thing as a lone wolf. And I can take you through how lone wolves are recruited and how they're built and so on and so on. And then lo and behold, look at what the Oversight Project from the Heritage Foundation just published. If you haven't seen that, you got to take a look at that, because they're looking at a geolocation data from cell phones, and at least one of those cell phones was visiting the shooter in the days before the shooting happened, but was also visiting. I love the way they describe this online. A building near an FBI building in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
No. That's not what that is. Okay, I know that building. I've been to that building. It's a Washington D.C. field office, which is tucked away in a nondescript, building in Washington D.C., where most people don't even know that that's where the FBI is, and that's where that person was going. So can I say I cannot give you any definitive statements about the FBI, the nature of the FBI's involvement. But what I can tell you, I know that that's a Washington D.C. field office for the FBI. I know they like to keep that under wraps, and I know that we won't know the truth, the whole truth, until someone's answered the question of who that person is and what they were doing.
Yep.
It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. When there's a lot of stuff that I still want to get into, but I know we've got some time issues, and I want to make sure that we respect that for you.
Thank you, Mark.
So let's try and wrap this up, and
I'll shorten my
hopefully
answers.
revisit it.
I won't talk so much.
No, you were absolutely fantastic. Everything that you laid out was so important to demonstrate to the people what the media is really all about. And hopefully we can have you back and delve farther into all of this and let people know how they've been lied to. The Benghazi story in and of itself, if that's not awakening to people when they listen to the truth as opposed to the narrative, and you were the scapegoat.
Yeah.
And that's always corporate America's way. Always got to be a scapegoat. And in our business, that's always the way that it was. If you don't follow the agenda, they will hang you out to dry in a heartbeat. So hopefully we'll be able to do this again. But Dave, anything to close on?
No, Lara, I'm glad you talked for such a long time, because otherwise one of us would, and nobody wants to hear what we have to say. But no, I would just again thank you, because I think that you have so much to offer to the movement. And I don't identify one movement. There's many movements in this country happening right now. And most of the ones who get it, doesn't matter what your lane is. We all have a lot of different lanes. There's people that deal with flat earth, and that's their lane. There's people that deal with media and health and everything else, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we all share the same bond, which is that we have all been awakened throughout, especially over this last decade, depending on where you came into this.
Mm-hmm.
And that we all understand that in order to maintain a cohesive society, we cannot allow these lies to continue in Western society. It's not going to work. And I think we're all smart enough to realize we're never going to agree on everything, but I think we've all gotten too used to the way the system is operated. And with everybody awakening, people need voices like yours. I mean, the importance of what you're doing can't be understated. And the fact that you take time out of your schedule to come on podcasts like this, here recording this at, 9:45 Eastern time on a Thursday night, it just should demonstrate to anybody that isn't familiar with your work, although many of us are, but should just demonstrate your dedication to your craft. And I think that that just is an incredible thing. The fact that I get to sit here with Mark and interview you, and I'm just going to geek out for a second, is an honor, and it really is. But it's less about us and more about the fact that people like yourself and a number of others who have stepped out of the matrix, stepped out of the system, taken the slings and arrows, and yet still take the time to dedicate it to all different levels. You've been in documentaries, you've been on 60 Minutes, you've been in, all different, but yet you still take the time to do shows like this, because that shows that above everything else to me, shows your dedication to the truth. And I do believe that as we move forward into this awakening that we're all going through right now, I think you're going to have a even more major role than you did in your previous life, so to speak, in media. And I do believe that you're going to be one of the great educators of this system as we move forward. And again, I just thank you for everything you've been through, because I know just in this little world we have in podcasting, and I've only been in this game on a live stream for a year, in kind of a truth movement for a few years. And I know the attacks that come my way, and I'm not a national figure the way you were. So to take the slings and arrows you have, much like Donald Trump has and many others, and you still dedicate your time to this the way you do, I just want to commend you for that. Thank you, because it's incredibly important. And people like you are going to make a real difference in how we fix the system going forward, and we don't end up reliving what we've been through for the last number of years.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you guys are doing this. I mean, it should, basically we failed, right? We in the media have failed. And so people like yourselves, I mean, you're stepping up and doing this because we're not doing our job. And as I said to some of my friends who are journalists, longtime friends, I said, it's up to us to fix it, right? I mean, and one of my friends, really close friends, who's an incredible journalist in France, she said to me, I never thought about that. And I said, yes. I said, who's going to fix it? I mean, is it up to somebody else to come and fix the media? I said, no, it's up to us journalists. Like, we're responsible, And so that's why, Mark, when you got me on a Sunday night, in the middle, by the way, of another flash flood in Texas, as similar to one we had tonight, I automatically said yes, because I know how hard it is to come from within the business and to stand up for who you are and to stand up and be counted, and how important that is. And the fact is, what I would say to people is, don't let anyone stand alone. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to kill my dog. I'm not throwing this, Ethan. I'm going to kill you. I'm hiding his bowl. Okay, I have 4 Belgian Malinois and a hot dog and 5 cats. So, but okay, this is the thing. If you want people to stand up, you have to speak up. Because when they stand up, if you let them stand alone and you let them fall alone and you let them die alone, then you are not creating a system where other people are going to stand up. We are herd animals. It's okay to want to fit in and to be part of the herd and to not be an outlier. It's perfectly understandable if the thought of being excoriated publicly. In fact, it was Mel Gibson who said, what is the number one thing most people fear? He said, it's public humiliation. He said, and I've had plenty of it and I don't care anymore. So I feel a little bit like Mel Gibson. I've had plenty of it and I don't care. But I understand if there are people out there who are not built for that, because we are not all built to be leaders, and why are we herd animals? Because there's safety in numbers. And so they have demonized that sense. As I tell my kids, your tribe can be your family, it can be your town, it can be your community, it can be your state. I said, you might say, oh, I hate living in this small country town, right? I said, but let me tell you, if you're in London and you bump into somebody from your small country town, that's going to be your tribe. And you're going to know about things and share and understand things about each other that nobody else is going to understand. And so they've made that bad. They've demonized that if you gravitate towards people who know and understand you, that there's something wrong with that. It's not. That is not true. There's nothing wrong with that. It just, all we're meant to say is that it's okay if you're not part of my tribe. That doesn't mean you have any less rights than I do. Doesn't mean I get to hurt you, or doesn't mean I get to discount you or toss you out with the trash. And so what I would say to people is, I like people to know that I can't do it alone. You guys can't do it alone. None of us can do any of this on our own. We need every person. If you're standing on the banks of the river, watching this nation drown, hoping somebody else is going to jump in and save it, then you've surrendered your position on the battlefield. And someone else is celebrating that victory. Okay, and I've spoken to so many people who say, well, I can't deal with it anymore. I had to check out. And I say, I understand. I feel that way too sometimes. But when you check out, just know you gave up that ground. Okay, that's one less person in the fight. And they're not giving up any ground. Every piece of ground that they're losing is being clawed back from them. And there is a lot of ground that is being clawed back. Okay, that if you just look around you, there are many, many signs that show you. Failing to assassinate Donald Trump is one of the many signs that has encouraged people to stand up and be honest about who they are, what they believe in, and who they support. And what I would urge people is, if you want good people in the FBI and the CIA and the Department of Justice, if you want them to stand up and tell the truth about how everything has been corrupted from within, then when they stand up, stand by them in whatever way you can. Find your niche. Find the way that you can help, the way that you can contribute, that's consistent with what the way you live your life, and just recognize that this is a time like we've never faced ever before. And if you spend all your time clinging to what you're afraid of losing, and if you live in your fear and you let your fear dictate your actions, then you've already lost. You've already taken a knee. And I do just want to end with echoing what Tucker Carlson said when he called this a spiritual battle. We've all known that this is a spiritual battle for a long time, but it's really great when someone whose voice is as powerful as Tucker's, to hear him say it. And I would say, yes, I agree with him. It is a spiritual battle between good and evil. There's no question which side I'm on. I chose God a long time ago, and I choose him again every day. And also, I think it's kind of over for them. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. When you have an animal that's cornered,
Right.
that's when it's most dangerous. And they're cornered right now. So don't rest on your laurels. Don't think it's all going to be up to Donald Trump. He's a life raft. If they manage to overwhelm the cheat, it will be a miracle, but it will also just be a life raft. Okay, because it's just a beginning. If you want Trump to do all of this, tear apart the deep state, but every time they write a demeaning article about him, you're going to be like, ooh, I don't want to be associated with that. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wish Trump would be just a little bit, different in public. Please. If you're one of those people, I'm sorry, but you're kind of worse than an all-out Marxist at this point. You're disgusting because you stand for nothing. You stand for nothing. Okay, so one of the things someone asked me just in the last few hours was, what's the point? They'd resigned their position as precinct chair. They said, what's the point of voting if they're just going to cheat? The point is this: cheating takes, the bigger the cheat, the bigger the cover up. The bigger the cover up, the harder it is, right? What do they need to cover the cheat? They need time. Because whatever you can do inside the machines with algorithms and everything else, you cannot end up with more votes than registered voters. So when you see those ballot drops in the middle of the night that were happening, and you see ballots being counted over and over, all of that is meant to cover up the cheat, right? That's meant to explain away a result that has no relationship to reality. So bear in mind this: the more of you that show up to vote, the greater the expression of the people's will, the harder it is going to be for them to cheat. The bigger the cheat will need to be, the more time they will need to make it all match up. That's why they stopped counting in all those swing districts, whether you've never seen that happen before. No, I've yet to meet a single person who can remember ever seeing that happen. So they need that time to cover up the cheat. And then remember this: if you look throughout history at when the concession and victory speeches have been made in presidential elections, the vast majority happened on the day of voting or the day after. So don't let them convince you that there's a reason to wait for weeks. Do not let them convince you of that. It's a lie. And if machines are supposed to make our elections more efficient, there's no reason that we should have to wait days or even weeks for a result. So I would say to people, not only is it important to vote, it's more important than it has ever been. And if you're one of those people standing on the sidelines hoping someone else is going to save this country, someone else is going to look after your children or your grandchildren, then you need to know that's not going to happen. It's up to every single one of us to play our part. And it begins with speaking up. So I just want to say thank you both for speaking up.
Well, okay. How do very few people leave me stuck for words. You've kind of done so. We live, I guess that's kind of part of the Jerry Maguire speech. We live in a very, very cynical world, and we worked in a very, very cynical business. And the sad part is we spent a lot of time doing a lot of harm to a lot of people because people believed in us. And there were very few of us that were really on the right side trying to do the right thing.
And we betrayed them as a profession.
Yes, we did. And there are many, many, many people out there to this day who continue to betray that trust.
But
They
it's like
betray-
being a bad parent, Your child may be damaged by what you've done, but all they want is to see you try to be better. They just want to, you know what I mean? We can't live without the media. We can't live without information and honest information and honest reporting. So, it's one thing, just own it. Own what we've done, but make it right. And that's what'll count. Just work every day of your life to make it count.
And that is what we're doing here. And all the times that I've said live on the air, turn off the mainstream media. You're not getting facts. Turn it off. Turn off the sports. Turn off all of it because you're not getting the truth. But in conjunction with that, learn to discern. We have a population globally nowadays that has more information at their fingertips than they've ever had before. And yet people are less and less educated than they ever were before because it's easier to watch the idiot in front of the camera spew lies to you and believe that than it is to go and research the facts. So please, you've heard from one of the few true journalists out there before and still.
Thank you.
Learn and learn to discern.
Question everything. Oh, wait. My mother used to say, what would she say? Love many, trust few, and always paddle your own canoe. So there you go.
I like that. I love that.
Thank you both so much. Thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
what you're
joining
doing.
us. I hope we can do this again soon and continue paddling that boat.
I will.
Yep.
I
Thank
will.
you,
Thank
everybody,
you both.
for joining
Take
us.
care.
And we'll
All
see you again soon.
You take
Good night,
care.
everybody.
Good night.